Hello and welcome everybody. Today we'll be going over Laravel in depth to prepare ourselves for the certification exam. And in this video, we'll be talking about collections. So first of all, what is a collection? Well, a collection is really just a wrapper that Laravel puts on arrays of data that help make them easier to work with. They are immutable, meaning that by default, they return another collection class. This is really helpful because it makes it easy to chain methods to a single class. Collections in Laravel are also macroable, meaning that you can add methods to the collection class at runtime. We'll go into both of these characteristics a bit later in the video. But first, let's check out where they live in the code. Let's open up a Laravel application and go into the vendor Laravel framework source collections folder. All the information that we need is right here. From here, let's first jump into the helpers file, creating and extending collections. Let's take a look at the collection helper function, as we'll be using this a lot to create our collections. As we can see, it simply returns a new instance of the collection class and passes in the value parameter. Looking at the collection class, we can see from the constructor that the class will pass our values into the function getArrayable items. This simply turns whatever we pass into our collection as a value into an array. Let's go ahead and open up Tinker to create our first collection. As we can see here, the collect helper method was used by passing in an array which returned a collection. As I mentioned earlier, collections are immutable. So we can take certain methods that can transform the data and return another collection. This allows us to chain our methods. So we can do this with chunk, map, filter, count by, duplicates, among many other methods. So for instance, we can create a collection like this with several different numbers in there. Then if we want to find the unique values, we can use the unique method. Then we can use the map method to pass in the numbers one by one. And in this case, we will multiply each of these numbers by 2. Then we can use the filter method. And let's say that we only want to keep those with a number that is greater than 5. And finally, we'll bring this all to an array using the toArray method. Now, we can do all of this separately, as I've just shown, or since they are all immutable, meaning that they are all collections and they all return collections, then we can simply chain them all together. So here you can see that I am chaining all of the methods together. So we have the original collect method to create the collection. Then we take the unique values, we map that collection, passing in each number and multiplying that by 2. Then we'll filter any of the numbers that we want, which are greater than 5, and then we'll bring that to an array. And that does the exact same thing. So you can see with this immutability, we get a much cleaner syntax and we can create our functions much more easily. We also mentioned how collections are macroable. This means that we can add additional methods to the collection class at runtime. This is fine, but it's much better practice to declare these macros in a service provider. Looking at our previous example, if we wanted to create a macro that would double each number, we could simply create a macro like this. So first we would bring in the collection. So we'd use Illuminate support collection and then run the macro method. Then we have the name of the method right here, and our callback is this function. What we will be doing here is mapping over the collection as it comes in, and with each of the numbers, we'll be multiplying them by 2. We have established this macro right here. Then let's create our collection and let's go ahead and run that macro on our collection, right? So we're using the ×2 method, the macro that we have just created, and we can run that on the collection that we have also just created. And you can see here that it has simply doubled each of the numbers. If it is this simple, you can have it within your controller. But as I mentioned, if it's more complex than this, it's much better practice to declare these in the service provider. Higher order messages. Laravel's collections also support higher order messages, which essentially allows you to create methods within your model and use them seamlessly on your collections. You can use higher order messages with the following methods: average, contains, each, every, filter, etc., etc. Let's create an example to see how this works. I've created a dummy database in which I have footballers, the squads that they play for, and the leagues that they play in. I've also created the models that go with this, such as footballer, squad, which has many footballers, and a league, which has many squads and has many footballers through the leagues. Now let's go ahead and open up Tinker. And what we want to do here is see how many footballers from Juventus have a red card already. So first, what we'll have to do is find the squad ID for Juventus. So we'll go through the squad's model, find out where the name is equal to Juventus. We'll pluck that ID, and then we'll get the first one. So essentially turning it back into an integer, and we'll get number 31. Now that we have the Juventus ID, let's go ahead and get all of the footballers who play for Juventus, and we'll go ahead and call that bianconeri. So we'll use the footballer model, and then we'll find the footballers which have the squad ID equal to the Juventus ID, and then we'll get all of them. And as you can see here, we have simply returned that collection with all of the footballers. All right, now's the time to find out all of the players who currently have a red card. And we've created this method within the footballer model called hasRedCard, and it will simply return a Boolean where this red cards is greater than 0. So we can use the higher order message right here, this hasRedCard method on the filter method, and go ahead and filter out all of the bianconeri and count how many of them have a red card. And currently we have 3. Now let's create a second function that will allow us to give red cards. So what it will do is essentially update whichever item we give it, and it will add 1 to the red cards column. And as you may know, because we are updating a column, we need to add that column name within the fillable array. Then using the higher order method, we can pass this method, the give red card, onto the each method, which will be used on each of the players from Juventus. It will update the collection and give all of them a red card. So that is how we use higher order messages in a nutshell. So we can create a method within the model, and then we can use that method on one of the several methods that we can use on the collections. Now that we've taken a brief look at some of the collection methods, let's go ahead and take a deeper dive to see how we can use them. Collection methods. If you take a look at the documentation at Laravel.com, you can see that there are over 100 methods specifically for collections. If you're a seasoned PHP developer, you will recognize a lot of these methods and may think, well, if they work in PHP, why not just use those instead? While it is true that pure PHP methods will work within Laravel, you may find that Laravel's own collection methods are cleaner and more intuitive. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of these methods. Most of the collections methods can be found within the collection.php file within the collections folder in Laravel Framework Illuminate. Let's go ahead and open up Tinker and give some of them a shot. So the first method that we have here is all, and we can see it simply returns all of the items. So if we have our collection, imagine we created this collection with an array of 1, 2, 3, passed the all method, and we can see it simply gives us that array. The next method we have is average, which you can use as AVG, or you can spell out the entire word, and it simply sums all the items and divides it by the number of items. So we have our 3 items right here, right? So the average of all these numbers is 2. The next method that we have is chunk, and all it does is it takes your collection and chops it into pieces given the size of each chunk. For each, we have the array chunk, and we pass in the items, we get the size, and then we simply return all of these different chunks. And so imagine we have a collection of these 9 numbers. We want to chunk by 3. It will return us 3 different collections within the main collection with the groups of 3 different numbers. The collapse method brings in the array class and then uses that collapse method. So let's go there and check it out. And here from the array class, we can see the collapse method. It accepts that array. What it will do is get all of the values from the different arrays and bring that into a results array, and then array merge from nothing with those results. So let's imagine that we have this collection. So it is an array of 3 different arrays in here. So this collection would normally be these 3 different arrays, but if we collapse it, then this would just give us one array with all of the numbers in there. So our next method is combine, and what it really does is it allows the first collection to be the keys, and then the next part will be the values, right? So our name will be Alf, and then the skill will be eating cats, which is what Alf does, and it will go ahead and give us that associative array within the collection, right? So name Alf, skill eating cats. Our next method is collect, and we've already talked about that. It simply initiates a new collection class. Next method that we have here is concat, and all it does is concatenate one of the values to a collection. So it'll push all of these given items that we have here within concat onto this collection. So we have a collection of Brad and Lucas, we'll concat Robbie. So all 3 will be in the new collection. The next method is contains, and all it does is determine if an item exists within a collection. So we can see here that we're passing a key and determining if that key is in the array of the items. So we have here, for example, the items, that collection would be friends, and we'll see if Ravi is contained within there, and that is true. Otherwise, we can see if alpha is in there, and unfortunately that is false. Next method that we have here is count, and it'll simply give us the number of items within a collection. Let's go to the collection. So we are collecting these 4 numbers, and then we'll go ahead and count how many numbers that we have. We can see here that we have 4 numbers. Next method is slightly different, and that is count by. It will essentially give us an associative array of how many times each of these items occurs. So we can see here we have 1 shows up there once, 2 is once, 3 is once, but 4 on the other hand is showed up 4 times. So you get this associative array, which could be helpful to determining how many times each item appears in the collection. Next method is cross join, and what it will do is give us all possible permutations of the 2 arrays. So imagine we have this collection of A and B, and we're going to find all the permutations we have with C and D. So this should give us AC, AD, as well as BC and BD, and we can see that that is exactly what it has given us. The next method we have is diff, and it will find the items that are not present in both of the collections. So imagine we have this first collection of 1, 2, 3, second collection of 3, 4, 5, and the difference between the 2 is 1 and 2. So the difference from that first collection with these is 1 and 2. Next method we have here is duplicates, and what it will actually do is retrieve all of the duplicate items within a collection, and it will show you where they are within that collection. So here we can see that in the 4th position, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, we have the number 4, which was already here, the 5th position, 6th position, and 7th position. So it'll give you the position of the item as well as the name of the item. In this case, that will be 4. So we briefly talked about the each method a little bit earlier, but all it does is essentially execute that callback over each of the items. So let's go ahead, maybe we'll talk about it again. So imagine we want to get all the players from Napoli. We get the squad ID and get all the players. So Azzurri would be all the footballers with the squad ID, the Napoli ID, and that gives us the collection of footballers. And then finally, then using the each method, we can iterate over all the footballers in Azzurri and give them all a red card. As you can remember that we had this method available to us in the footballer model, and doing that gives us back the collection, and you can see that all the footballers have been given another red card. Next function we have here is every. What it does is allow us to pass this test right here. So that will be the callback. And then within this callback, we'll see if all of the items within there pass this test. So in my example, when divided by 2, if the leftover is equal to 0. And we can see that that is false because we have odd numbers in here. However, if we pass all even numbers, we can see that now this is true and it will return true. Next method we have here is except, and what it will do is return all of the items within the collection except for one with a specific key. So imagine we create this collection of several of the footballers and their teams. So Juventus, we have Dybala. For Milan, we have Zlatan Ibrahimovic. And for Inter, we have Lukaku. Imagine we don't want Juventus. We have everyone except for Juventus. We can use the except method and pass this key. So the key here be Juventus, the value be Dybala, but in this case it'll be except, so we'll just pass Milan and Inter instead. So the next function is filter, and what it will do is it will accept a callback, and in this callback we will determine which of the values that we have within the collection should be returned. So in this example, I only want the even numbers, so the remainder when divided by 2 must be 0, and it will take all of these numbers that I have here and only return the ones that are even. So we can see here what it returns this collection for the first place. So 0, 1 was 2, and then in the third position, so 0, 1, 2, 3 was 4. So the next method is the first method. And what it will do instead is accept that callback and give you the first value that is true for that callback. So if we use the same function as before, instead change filter for first, then we should get the first value that passes this truthy test, which should be 2. There we go, we get 2. Next function that we have here is flatten, and what it does is essentially turn a multi-dimensional array into a single dimension array. So we can see here that is using the array class and is using that function for flatten right there. And so what it does is it goes through the array, it takes out all the items, and then if it's not an array, it adds the result to the item. Otherwise, it'll get the values and it'll flatten those and then add each of those values to that resulting array and then return that result. So let's take a look here at my example. I am creating a collection, which is a multi-dimensional array. So for example, we have the team is Juventus, the players are Ronaldo, Morata, and Dybala. And instead we want to flatten it, right? So we want to make this a single dimension array. And so what it will do is give us the values that we have here for each. So it should just give us Juventus, Ronaldo, Morata, and Dybala. And there we go. What we can see here is a single dimension array within that collection. The next method that we have here is the flip method. And what it will do is invert the keys and the values by using the array flip, which is native in PHP. So for our example, what we'll do is create a collection. So the team will be Milan and the player will be Zlatan, and we will flip them. So what that means is that instead of using the key team in the value Milan, it will turn Milan into a key and team into a value. Same thing with player and Zlatan. So we can see here that Zlatan is player and Milan is the team. The next method that we have here is forget. And what it will do is just remove an item from the collection based on the key. For each of the keys that we have, it will unset the key. So we'll essentially remove the key and its value and then return that collection back to you. So here, for example, we have the collection, same as the collection that we had before, but this time we will forget the team. So it should remove just Milan. And we can see here that it returned us a collection with the player of Zlatan. Next method that we have here is the get method, and it accepts a key as well as an optional parameter, which is the default. So if something doesn't exist, then it will pass that default. So let's take a look. What does it do? So if the array key exists within the collection, then it'll pass in the value for that key. So this items, and it'll pass in the key. So it'll get the value. Otherwise, so if the array key does not exist, it will simply return that default value. And if we don't pass the default value, it will simply be null. So going back to our example, if we're trying to get the player, it should just give us Zlatan. There we go. But imagine if we were looking for the trainer. Well, it's not in there. We get null, but we can also pass in a default value. So if the trainer does not exist, we'll pass in the default value of Stefano Pioli. And we can see that since the trainer does not exist within our collection, that default value was passed in. Next method is the has method, and it accepts the one parameter, which is a key, and it will simply return a Boolean true if the array key exists and false if it does not. So in our example that we keep using, so we use the has method on player. So does player exist? It should just give us true. If we try to pass in trainer, for example, this will give us false. So the next method here is intersect. It will use PHP's array intersect functions to see of the two arrays that it is passed, it will show which ones are in common, right? So imagine we have this collection of Milan, Juventus, and Inter. We find the intersection with Chelsea, Tottenham, and Milan. It should just return us Milan. Next function that we have here is keys, and all it will do is give us the array keys. So for example, if we have a collection with Team Milan, player Zlatan, and we just want the keys of this collection, then we can pass this keys method. And here we can see that the key was team and player, and those were passed. Likewise, you can pass a values method if you want to get the values, and this would just give us Milan and Zlatan. Next function is last, and what we can do here is either pass in nothing, right? And it will simply give us the last item that we have here, or we can pass a callback. So imagine if we don't, it'll simply give us 4, right? Because that was the last item in the collection. Or if we pass in a callback, then we can give something specific. So imagine we want an even number. We should expect to get 3 because that is the last value that passes this statement. Next function we have here is map, and it accepts a callback. And what it will do here is use the PHP's array map function, using that callback and passing in the items and those keys. And then it will return those results back as an array. So for example, if we have the collection of 1, 2, 3, 4, and we use the map and we pass in a callback. So our callback here is returning the number multiplied by 2, right? We're passing in that number, and each of these will be that number. So what it will do is multiply 1 by 2, 2 by 2, 3 by 2, 4 by 2, etc. And we can see here that it returned us a collection with these numbers. The next function is only, and actually we talked about the accept method before, and this is the exact opposite. So instead of removing one of the items, this will only give us those items that we named. So you can see here, if we create the collection of these 3 teams and the 3 players, and we only want Milan and Inter, it will only pass us those 2. Whereas accept was just the opposite. If we did accept Juventus, then it would pass us the other 2. So the next method we have is called search. And what it will do is that you pass it in a value. If this value exists within the collection, then it will give you the key. Otherwise, it will return false. So let's take a look here. So imagine we have that same collection as usual, and we're looking for Zlatan. See if Zlatan does exist, because he does, then it will give us Milan, right? And so we can see Milan. But if it doesn't exist, let's say we're looking for Paul Pogba, we can see that he's not here, then we can say false. Next method we have here is sort. What it will do is alphabetically sort or numerically sort a collection. So here we have a few numbers, and if we hit sort, it will give us those numbers in ascending order. And we can also pass in strings. It will sort them in alphabetical order. So the opposite of sort is sort desk, and so it will give us the reverse alphabetical order or the reverse numeric order. So in this case, it will give us the largest number first, which would be 9, then 5, 3, 2, and the same thing goes for strings. So instead of being in alphabetical order, sort desk gives us reverse alphabetical order. Next method we have is toArray, and it will do just that. It will turn a collection into a plain array. So if we create this collection right here, use toArray, it will give us that array. Then toJSON will do essentially that same thing. It will JSON encode all of the information that we have given it. So here it has JSON encoded this array. Next method we have here is unique, and what it will do is return only the unique items within that collection. This method starts with the empty array of exists, and then it rejects any of the next items that are passed into that array if they are already present within the exists array. Otherwise, it adds them to the array. So we can see here with the example, I have added a bunch of these numbers to a collection, and then if we wanted to find the unique values, we just pass in the unique method. All right, and that does it for now. We've gone through quite a few of the collection methods. Of course, there are over 100 of them, so I would definitely recommend checking out the documents and going through them yourself. So this has been Laravel's collections in a nutshell. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to write in the comments section below. And if you're planning on taking the certification exam, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. All right, thanks everybody. Take care.